Hey guys, how's it going? Hope you're doing well. My name is Crown, and today I'm going to read you some very interesting stories that I hope that you're gonna love. And now, without further ado, let's go!
I feel like I need to vent about these entitled people I've been living with. It began when I decided to move out of my parents' house after landing my first job as a junior software developer. The pay was decent, but the housing market in our area was absolutely insane, so I knew I needed roommates. That's when my childhood friend suggested we could live together with her boyfriend. I'd known her since middle school, and while we weren't as close as before, I still trusted her. The apartment they found was perfect. Modern, spacious, and in a great location. The only catch was that they wanted me to take less storage space since I was single and wouldn't need as much room. Being naive and excited about my first time living alone, I agreed. The initial arrangement was that I'd get 6 out of the 33 kitchen cabinets, minimal counter space, and no storage in the living or dining areas. In exchange, they said I could use their cookware and dishes. It seemed fair at first. I barely cooked and didn't own much stuff anyway. Things were okay for the first few months until her boyfriend started buying in bulk. I'm talking about entire boxes of frozen meals, multiple bags of frozen vegetables, and enough meat to feed an army. One day I went to put my weekly groceries in the freezer and found it completely packed with his stuff. I sent him a polite message asking if I could get a bit more freezer space for my things. 2 days passed, and they just left me on red. That's when I decided to take matters into my own hands and moved some of their stuff around to make space for my groceries. Suddenly, my friend messaged me with this whole spiel about being stuck as a middleman. She explained that her boyfriend was an exact measurement split kind of guy and wanted to measure everything himself. She tried to justify it by saying she didn't want me to think she was being indifferent to either of us. I responded by telling her that if her man-child boyfriend wanted exact measurements, we should measure everything, not just what he chose. I contacted my friend who works as an architect, and she helped me calculate the exact volumes of all storage spaces in the apartment. 3 days later, we had a complete breakdown of every cabinet, drawer, and shelf. The results were shocking. I was entitled to way more space than what they'd given me. The measurements showed I should have 13 cabinets instead of 6, plus proportional fridge and freezer space. When my friend tried to designate some cabinets as shared space, which only they were using, I questioned every single one. She couldn't argue with the math. Our security camera caught her boyfriend sneaking around at 2 a.m. with a measuring tape, probably trying to prove we got the calculations wrong. He must have failed because I never heard a word about it from either of them. But it gets better. Last week I noticed my portion of the freezer had some of his frozen meals in it again. I sent a message to our group chat stating that according to our agreed measurements, this was my space, and they needed to remove their items within 24 hours, or I'd move them to their designated area. Her boyfriend tried to argue that the measurements weren't accurate and claimed the freezer layout was different. I shut that down quickly by sending a full breakdown of calculations, including timestamps from security footage of his late-night measuring attempt. My friend tried to play mediator again, asking if we could all be reasonable about this. I simply replied that the numbers were reasonable and don't lie, adding that I'd been more than patient. They removed the items within an hour. Now every time I hear him opening the freezer at odd hours, which happens surprisingly often, I check the security camera feed. Sometimes I wave at the camera when I see him measuring things, just to let him know I'm watching. They can't complain because they're the ones who wanted to be exact about measurements. I may have lost access to their cookware, but I've gained so much more space. Plus, watching a grown man obsess over measuring storage space in the middle of the night is entertainment I never knew I needed. I'm still planning to move out when the lease ends, but for now, I'm enjoying my properly measured share of the apartment. I've been a middle school teacher for over 15 years now, and my son goes to the same school where I teach. I know some people might think it's awkward having their kid in the same school, but we've managed to make it work. He's in a different grade than the ones I teach, so we don't cross paths too often during school hours. Last week, during my lunch break, I was grading some papers when my colleague burst into the teacher's lounge. She frantically told me that my son had been hurt and was in the nurse's office. I dropped everything and ran. When I got there, my son was holding an ice pack to his head, with a nasty gash above his eye and several cuts on his arms. The school nurse was already calling an ambulance. That's when I saw him, this 8th grade kid standing in the corner with his mother, who I immediately recognized as one of those parents who always cause trouble during parent-teacher association meetings. She'd throw a fit if her precious boy didn't get the lead role in school plays or if teachers didn't give him extra credit opportunities. The nurse explained that a drone had hit my son in the head while he was eating lunch in the courtyard. Security footage showed the other kid deliberately steering the drone straight at my son's face. When I asked the kid why he would do this to my son, he just smirked. His mother immediately jumped to his defense, shouting that her son would never hurt anyone on purpose. She tried to blame my son, saying he probably got in the way of the drone and should have been more careful. When I mentioned the security footage, she dismissed it, claiming the cameras were unreliable. Then she revealed the real reason. She said my son had humiliated hers in class yesterday. That's when I learned what this was all about. Apparently, during science class, the teacher had asked a question about photosynthesis. Karen's son had given a wrong answer, and when my son provided the correct one, some kids had chuckled. That was it. That was the humiliation that warranted assaulting my child with a drone. The principal called the police, given the deliberate nature of the attack. When they arrived, Karen completely lost it. She started ranting about how this was just boys being boys, and that they couldn't arrest a child for playing with a toy. When the officer explained that deliberately causing injury with any object was assault, she began threatening them. She started bragging about her husband's importance and telling them she'd have their badges. The officer told her to step back, but instead, she tried to grab her son and make a run for it. The officers blocked her way and she actually tried to shove past them. Big mistake. Within seconds, she was in handcuffs, screaming hysterically about police brutality and how she'd sue everyone. She was yelling threats at the school, the officers, and especially at me and my son, saying her lawyers would destroy us all. Her son's smirk finally disappeared when another officer started asking him questions about the incident. Turned out the drone wasn't even supposed to be at school. It was against policy. He'd brought it specifically to hurt my son. The whole thing ended with both of them being taken away. The kid to juvenile detention and Karen to the police station. My son needed 6 stitches and had a mild concussion, but he recovered well. Karen's husband turned out to be much more reasonable than she was. He came to visit us at the hospital, apologized profusely, and offered to pay all medical bills. He also mentioned they were getting divorced, and this incident was the last straw. Apparently, she'd been enabling their son's horrible behavior for years, and he'd had enough. 2 weeks later, Karen lost her job at some big company because of her arrest video going viral. Her son got expelled and had to do community service. Plus, his dad sent him to live with his grandparents in another state where he'd attend a strict private school. My son is back at school now, and the other kids treat him like a hero for standing up to the school bully. The incident led to a complete ban on drones anywhere near school property, and they installed additional security cameras in the courtyard. The silver lining is that parent-teacher association meetings are much more peaceful now without Karen trying to run the show. I'm a 40-year-old woman who spent the last decade focusing on my career as a corporate lawyer. While my siblings all settled down and started families, I chose a different path. Don't get me wrong, I love my job and the independence it gives me, but sometimes being the only single adult in a family full of couples can be challenging. 2 months ago, my sister and her husband organized a long weekend trip to Lake Tahoe, inviting both immediate and extended family. The location holds a special place in my heart. It's where our parents used to take us camping every summer when we were kids. Given the recent high-profile cases I've been handling and the endless nights at the office, I was really looking forward to this getaway. When my sister first brought up the trip, I made it crystal clear that I'd only go if I had my own bedroom. After years of being relegated to couches and air mattresses, on family trips because I'm single. I wasn't going to let it happen again. When I brought this up, my sister quickly assured me that I would definitely have my own room, mentioning they were getting a huge vacation house. I reminded her about last Christmas when I ended up on the pull-out couch in the living room, but my brother-in-law jumped in to reassure me, saying they had done the math and everyone would have their own space. I trusted them and paid my full share, the same amount as every other adult on the trip. Everything seemed fine until a few weeks later when my brother-in-law approached me with what he probably thought was a brilliant solution. He casually asked if I would mind staying in the bunk room with the boys, mentioning it would just be his son, my other nephew, and their friend. When I reminded him that I had already specified needing my own room and wasn't interested in sharing with teenagers, he tried to convince me by saying they were good kids and wouldn't bother me. I had to explain again that this wasn't the point, as I had paid for a private room just like everyone else. He dropped it after that, or so I thought. The night before the trip, as I was packing my bags, I received a text from my sister asking if I was good to stay in the boys' room. I immediately called her, my blood boiling. When I demanded to know why this was being brought up again after our previous discussions, she sheepishly admitted that she must have miscounted the couples and they were one room short. I couldn't believe she was claiming to have miscounted people she'd known her whole life. She tried to downplay the situation, saying it wasn't a big deal and that the boys wouldn't mind sharing. When I pointed out that I was a 40-year-old woman who shouldn't have to share a room with teenage boys, she had the nerve to say that since I was single, it was easier to move me around, and the couples needed their privacy. That was the last straw. Years of similar treatment came rushing back. Family vacations where I was treated like an afterthought, holiday gatherings where I was expected to sleep on couches while couples got proper beds, and countless times when my need for privacy was dismissed because I wasn't part of a pair. When I told her I wasn't going, she accused me of being dramatic, reminding me that everything was already paid for. I shot back that she shouldn't have lied to me, pointing out that I had paid the same amount as everyone else but was being treated like a second-class citizen. I hung up and immediately emailed the vacation rental company. Since I had contributed to the booking, I was able to access the reservation details. Lo and behold, I discovered that my sister had actually booked a house with fewer bedrooms than needed weeks ago. This wasn't a counting mistake at all. I took screenshots of everything and sent them in our family group chat, along with a breakdown of how much each person had paid. Then I contacted the rental company directly and got my portion refunded. The family chat exploded with messages, with my sister trying to explain herself and other relatives chiming in. But I stood my ground. Instead of going on their trip, I booked myself a lovely single room at a luxury spa resort in the same area, for less money than I would have paid for their overcrowded house. Now they're all up there, cramped in their vacation rental, while I'm enjoying room service and scheduled massages. My phone keeps buzzing with messages from relatives saying I'm being petty, but I've muted the chat. My sister and brother-in-law had to pay my portion of the rental since they were the ones who misled everyone. I'm 32, and until 6 months ago, I was working as a financial analyst. Life was going pretty well. I had a stable job, was living with my partner in our modest but comfortable house, and we were managing our mortgage payments just fine. Then came the diagnosis that turned everything upside down. Stage 2 breast cancer. The diagnosis hit me like a truck. I had to leave my job to focus on treatment, and suddenly our comfortable life wasn't so comfortable anymore. The medical bills started piling up and our savings were draining faster than we could have imagined. My partner has been incredibly supportive, working extra hours to keep us afloat, but it's been tough. That's when my partner's parents decided to stay with us for 2 months. They're millionaires who made their fortune in real estate, and while they're generally nice people, they brought their other daughter, my partner's sister, into our peaceful home. She's a successful model married to one of the country's top comedians. They make millions every weekend from his shows alone, not counting her modeling income. Today was particularly hard to stomach. The model sister came over, mascara running down her face, absolutely distraught. Everyone immediately surrounded her like she was a wounded animal. Through her tears, she started complaining about how her nanny was 3 hours late, and she had to watch her own child for 3 whole hours. My mother-in-law immediately jumped in, expressing how terrible it was, especially since they had specifically flown the nanny in from overseas. The model's sister continued sobbing, explaining that she pays the nanny so much money and how dare she be late because of a family emergency. She went on about how she was so exhausted she could barely make it to her photo shoot that day. I sat in the corner of our living room trying not to roll my eyes as everyone consoled her. But she wasn't done. After an hour of crying about the nanny situation, she moved on to her next crisis. She started whining about the housing market, explaining how she'd kept all her money in her savings account this year and now she couldn't afford the mansion she wanted. She lamented that if she had bought it last year, she would have saved so much money, declaring it the worst year of her life. My mother-in-law, ever sympathetic to her daughter's plight, suggested that maybe her husband could do a few extra shows to make up for it. I couldn't hold back anymore. The chemo had worn down my patience along with my hair. I spoke up, pointing out what real hardship looked like, having cancer at 32 and not being able to work, having to choose between paying for treatment or paying our mortgage, having to sit there and listen to her cry about her nanny being late while single mothers work 2 jobs just to feed their kids. The room went silent. Then my mother-in-law, who hasn't worked a day in her life thanks to her wealthy husband, told me I needed to get on with it, that everyone has problems, and pointed out how stressed her daughter was. That's when my partner, who had been quiet until now, finally intervened. In a firm voice, they asked if everyone was serious, pointing out that their spouse was fighting cancer while they were comparing it to a late nanny. They then demanded everyone leave our house. The model sister tried to bring up her nanny problem again, but my partner cut her off. They made it clear they didn't care about the nanny problem or the mansion problem, and told them all to get out of our house and not come back until they learned some perspective. They also told their parents that if they couldn't show some basic empathy, they could find somewhere else to stay for the remaining month. They left in a huff, but for the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe in my own home. My partner sat next to me and held my hand, apologizing for not speaking up sooner. They promised no more trying to please their family while they treated me like this, assuring me we'd get through this together, just the two of us. 2 weeks later, we received a check in the mail, enough to cover 6 months of mortgage payments. It was from my father-in-law with a note apologizing for his wife and daughter's behavior. And now we have reached the end of today's stories. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.